thinking about selling your property in Franklin, one of the most common questions is, should you renovate before selling? The assumption is if I spend money updating the property, I'll make more money when it sells. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it isn't. In fact, some of the most expensive pre-sale projects create very little additional leverage when the property actually reaches the market. Before investing in renovations, it's worth understanding how buyers interpret updates, repairs, and presentation, because buyers don't evaluate every dollar spent equally. One reason this decision feels difficult is that most sellers aren't evaluating the property from a buyer's perspective. They're evaluating it from an ownership perspective. You've lived with the property, noticed things over time, thought about projects you never completed, and collected a mental list of improvements that could be made. Then, when selling becomes a possibility, that list suddenly feels urgent. The challenge is that buyers don't see the property the same way you do. They interpret signals, not project histories. One of the biggest misunderstandings I see is the belief that every renovation creates equal value. It doesn't. A $40,000 project does not automatically create $40,000 of additional buyer confidence. In some cases, a smaller project creates more leverage than a larger one. Why? Because buyers respond first to friction, not features. If a buyer walks into a property and notices deferred maintenance, damaged surfaces, worn flooring, outdated paint, or obvious repairs, those items often create uncertainty. Once uncertainty enters the conversation, buyers begin mentally discounting value, sometimes more than the actual repair cost. This is why I often separate renovations into two categories. Category 1 is projects that reduce buyer friction. Category 2 is projects that reflect personal preference. Reducing friction often produces the strongest return. Examples of this include paint, flooring, lighting fixtures, minor repairs, landscaping, and maintenance items. These projects help buyers focus on the property itself instead of abstractions. The second category is different. Examples include luxury kitchen remodels, extensive customizations, highly personal design choices, major renovations that the next owner may not value. Those projects can be much harder to recover financially, especially if buyers would have chosen different finishes themselves. So should you renovate before selling in Franklin, Tennessee? The answer is usually, but make sure you renovate strategically, not extensively. The goal is not perfection, but clarity. When distractions are minimized, buyers can more easily recognize value. In Franklin, buyer expectations vary significantly depending on price point, neighborhood, and competition. A buyer evaluating a property in Temple Hills may interpret updates differently than a buyer evaluating a newer property in West Haven. A buyer comparing established neighborhoods may be more forgiving of cosmetic imperfections than a buyer comparing nearly identical new construction properties. This is why renovation decisions should always be viewed within the competitive landscape, not in isolation. The best question to ask when considering selling your property is, what improvements would meaningfully change buyer perception relative to competing properties? When evaluating renovations before selling, I think through three questions. First, will this reduce buyer uncertainty? Second, will this improve the property's positioning relative to the competition? And third, will buyers likely recognize and value the improvement during a showing? If the answer is yes to all three, the project should be given strong consideration. If the answer is no, the money may be better preserved elsewhere. This approach is especially helpful for high equity sellers, downsizers, move-up sellers, and owners who have multiple projects on their list. If you're looking at 10 possible updates, there's often a short list that creates most of the benefit. The objective is not to create the perfect property. It's to create confidence. Before making renovation decisions, it helps to understand how buyers are likely to interpret the property compared to competing options currently on the market. Sometimes the right answer is updating, sometimes simplifying, and sometimes it's doing less than you originally planned. If you like help thinking through that clearly, I'm always happy to help have a conversation about what buyers are actually noticing in today's Franklin market.